Greetings, my name is Josefine and
My name is Jasminne.
we are from Santa Laurensia Junior High School. And with this opportunity, we'll be presenting about our research titled Utilization of Natural Ingredients as a Sufficient Artificial Alcohol in Traditional Embodied Whiteboard Marker Ink.
So we decided to do this research because we realized the dangerous effects of commercial whiteboard markers ink that are used today. It can cause breathing problems, migraines, nausea, and more. To resolve this issue, we decided to use natural resources that are provided in Indonesia because it is not only healthy but is also safe for the long-term effect on our environment. Indonesia is also a country rich in spices and natural resources that we can utilize for our daily needs, meaning we could find the ingredients used in this research easily, and it is also easy to make.
For the ingredients, we use fermented ingredients that contains natural alcohol, which will also be our variable that we will be changing. First, we will use the fermented apple cider because according to our reference, fermented apple cider will form an apple vinegar, which contains natural alcohol molecules that we will utilize for our research. Second, we will be using fermented rice. Fermented rice shall form natural alcohol molecules with the help of yeast who will be breaking down the glucose. The last ingredient we will be using is tapai cassava, which also naturally contains alcohol without going through the fermentation process. When tapai cassava was made, the making process itself will make the tapai cassava contain alcohol.
According to Josefine in his video titled What's in Dry Erase Markers, whiteboard marker ink contains 5 main ingredients which are solvent, binder, releasing agent, and color pigment. For our solvent, we use aqueous because it can dissolve both organic and non-organic substances. For binder, we use Arabic gum because it can easily dissolve in aqueous due to it being hydrophilic. Next, we use polyethylene glycol as our releasing agent, and although this is a chemical ingredient, we didn't see as to why this ingredient is harmful and not safe to use, and so we use as much as 2%. Last or not least is our color pigment. We use instant coffee because according to our reference, it is soluble and an effective ingredient to use as a black color pigment.
Our research goal is to find the alternative whiteboard markers ink by using natural and safe ingredients to alternate commercial ink that uses dangerous chemical additives. Our research question that underlie our research is what natural fermented ingredient is the best substitute for technical alcohol in whiteboard markers ink? For the method in our research, we use the experimental method. The experimental method is a methodical and scientific approach to research in which the researcher manipulates one variable. And in this research, we will change the drying agent or technical alcohol with the fermented ingredients which we had mentioned before. Our research was held on Santa Laurensia School's physics lab and our house from the 23rd of September until the 22nd of October 2020.
So our research is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is where we ferment all of the ingredients used as substitute alcohol. Fermentation, or known as the breaking down of glucose and carbohydrates and turning them into alcohol with the help of a yeast called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. To do fermentation, you would have to add the yeast into your solution that has sugar, and sugar acts as the role of food, or the one who's being turned into alcohol by the yeast. The second stage is where we actually make the ink itself, and the third or last stage is where we do quality testing on the ink.
The experiment design or procedure that I will be explaining right now is the second stage or the making ink process. First, we dissolve the instant coffee to 100 ml of water or aqueous. Second, when it is already dissolved completely, we added 2.2 grams of Arabic gum to the solution little by little to avoid clotting. Third, while the Arabic gum was being added, stir the solution slowly to avoid bubbles and foams until the solution becomes homogeneous. After the solution becomes homogeneous, we added 2.2 grams of polyethylene glycol. After the polyethylene glycol was added, the solution became oily and we stirred it until it dissolved completely. The fifth step is to add 20 ml of one of the fermentation little by little as well. The last step is to stir the solution until it becomes homogeneous. Due to the stirring process, bubbles or foams are possible to occur. When this occurs, we let the solution sit for around 30 minutes until the foam started to dissipate.
So our third stage is quality testing, where we test our ink's capabilities through viscosity, density, drying time, and opacity. So to calculate the viscosity of the ink, we will use the formula of viscosity, which is eta equals to eta W times rho T divided by rho W times TW, in which eta is the ink's viscosity, rho is the density of the ink, and T is the time needed for the ink to flow down. Rho W is the density of water, which is 1 gram per milliliters, and TW is the time needed for water to flow down, which is 4 seconds. As for density, we will use the formula of density, which is rho equals to mass per volume. For drying time, we will use a stopwatch to measure the time needed for the ink to dry on the whiteboard. And last, we will test the color opacity of the ink on the whiteboard by observation and comparing it to commercial whiteboard markers ink.
These are the results for the alcohol produced by the fermentation for each ingredient. The apple cider fermentation was fermented for around 14 days. We measured the alcohol percentage that contains in the apple cider fermentation by using alcohol meter, and it showed as much as 7%. For the rest fermentation, it was left for ferment for around 21 days, meaning that the yeast had plenty of time to produce alcohol. However, when the rest fermentation was tested with the alcohol meter showed it has no alcohol. As for the tapai cassava, we first left it for around 3 weeks until its water came out. After around 3 weeks, we squeezed it with a piece of cloth to extract the tapai cassava's water. Since our reference showed that tapai cassava contains natural alcohol, we decided to utilize it in our experiment, but it turns out that it did not have any alcohol.
The viscosity of the ink with apple cider fermentation is 0.0478 gram per centimeter second, and to get it we multiply 0.0089 with 0.86 and 25, and then divide it with the result of 4 multiplied by 1. Then the density of the ink is 0.86 gram per milliliters, and as for the opacity of the ink, it is not as bold as the others, but it is erasable, leaving no marks whatsoever, and the average drying time needed is actually the fastest comparing to the others, with a time of 4 minutes and 22 seconds.
For the rest fermentation, we calculated the viscosity with the formula we mentioned before. Our calculation is 0.0089 times 0.87 times 22 divided by 1 multiplied by 4, and it equals to 0.0425 gram per centimeter second. We calculated the density with dividing the mass and volume of the ink. As for the color opacity, the rest fermentation have the boldest color among all the inks we had made, but for the erasability of the ink, it needs extra effort and it cannot be cleaned completely. In addition to my before statement, the rest fermentation's average drying time is 11 minutes and 16 seconds, which are the longest drying time among the other two inks.
The viscosity of the ink with tapai cassava is 0.0340 gram per centimeter second, and to get it, we multiply 0.0089 with 0.9 and 17, and then divide it with the result of 4 multiplied by 1. Then the density of the ink is 0.9 grams per milliliters, and the opacity of the ink is bold, but erasing the ink needs effort, leaving some marks and stains behind. The average drying time needed is 10 minutes and 22 seconds, meaning the ink with tapai cassava takes the longest to dry.
From our research results and analysis, we are able to conclude that the apple cider fermentation with 100 ml of water, 2.2 grams of Arabic gum, 2.2 grams of polyethylene glycol, and added with 4 grams of instant coffee is the best recipe for natural whiteboard marker ink. We were able to conclude this because the apple cider fermentation itself was the only fermentation that contains alcohol, and when the ink was made, it has the fastest drying time among the other two. It is erasable without any extra effort, and although it was not as bold as the other, but it is still pigmented and can be seen from a far distance.
So the difference between our ink with commercial ink is that our ink is made out of natural ingredients and does not produce any unpleasant smell, meaning it is safe and not harmful for anyone and the environment. However, our ink requires a longer time to dry and it is not as bold as the commercial ink. As for the commercial ink, it is made out of chemical substance and produces an unpleasant smell, meaning it is harmful for us and the environment. However, it dries faster and has a bolder color and lasts long.
Although our research results are still considered not effective to be applied significantly in our daily life, this research was a good start because this research can be used as a reference for the future, can still be developed or modified by future researchers to form a better result, and this research can also be considered as a successful research. We were able to find the main and supporting ingredients which fits perfectly as a recipe for natural whiteboard marker ink, although we use 2% of chemical ingredient. But this still doesn't change the fact that our ink still contains 98% of natural ingredient. Due to lack of equipment and experience, this research still needs some improvement so that it can regenerate into a better result in the future, with the use of modern technology and more experienced researchers. For future work, the future researchers can test and create a natural preservative so that the ink would last longer. They can also create a more pigmented and bold natural ink by using other ingredients that contains natural pigment. They can as well use other ingredients and change the ratio of alcohol used to create a natural ink with faster drying time. Last, they can find a natural ingredient substitute for polyethylene glycol.
Thank you for listening to our research presentation.